I chose D.
D, A, B.
A, B, yeah.
C?
I left B open.
All right. Anyone? No one was tempted by E. We can get rid of that one in a lickety split. How's that out there? How do we get rid of it?
Obligated.
Obligated. There was no discussion of what's obligated, right? That's just, again, just taking the argument further than what it said. So bottom line here, does anyone know how many conclusions are in this argument?
Like 3.
3, right?
1, 2.
I see 2.
2.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the reason I ask is that the therefore sentence is a conclusion. The so sentence is a conclusion. Which one is the main conclusion? So, right? It comes after the therefore, and the so points back and says it's a premise. So, my point here is that we have a premise that says oil reserves gradually drop as old oil fields are drained and rise suddenly as new fields are discovered. Therefore, oil reserves are unlikely to remain unchanged from one year to the next. My point here is we have the first sentence, right? The first sentence says what people said or claimed. Then we have a premise. Then we have an intermediate conclusion that is supported by that premise. And then we have an intermediate conclusion that supports the main conclusion. If you take a look at this intermediate conclusion, it says oil reserves are unlikely to remain unchanged from one year to the next. What does that mean in plain English?
It's unlikely to change.
Unlikely to change?
Within a year.
It's likely to change.
It's likely to change, right?
Oh,
if it's
sorry.
unlikely to remain unchanged,
Unchanged.
classic LSAT double negation,
Uh,
it's likely to change. So if it's likely to change, then does the main conclusion make sense? Most of the nations stating that their oil reserves were unchanged are probably wrong.
I don't
No, it
buy
doesn't
it,
fall.
but
I think that does make sense. I think if they're likely to change, then people who said that they didn't change are probably wrong.
no, like just because it's unlikely doesn't mean that that's actually happening that year specifically.
Sure, there's a probability that it might not, right?
Yeah.
But it's just saying that it's likely to change. And what did the conclusion say? Did the conclusion say that they're wrong?
Yeah, they say they're incorrect by
They're
reporting on change.
Probably incorrect. And it didn't even say all of them. It just said most of the nations stating that their oil reserves were unchanged are probably incorrect. That's two mosts in one sentence. So it doesn't even mean more than half. It just means most of the people who said something, of those, most of them are wrong. Right? It's not even, it's like a most of a most, so it's even, could be even less than half. Are we okay with this? My point here is that going from the intermediate conclusion to the main conclusion seems fine. So the flaw must be somewhere else. The assumption must be somewhere else. And the assumption does take place between the premise and the intermediate conclusion. I said premise one, but there's really only one premise, I guess. Well, this is a premise too, but a pure premise. Notice what this says. But oil reserves gradually drop as old oil fields are drained and rise suddenly as new oil fields are discovered. Okay, so when you go out and you drain a field, it's going to drop, and when you discover a new field, it's going to go up. That makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that the oil reserves are likely to change from one year to the next?
No.
Why not?
The negative and positive could balance. Like the drop.
There's a bigger problem here. You're absolutely right. The negative imbalance could be equal, right? But they're just saying unlikely to change. Anyone know what the problem here is? You guys.
Could it be that some fields are drained at the same time that new ones are?
That could happen. That they go down exactly 10 gallons and go back up exactly 10 gallons. There's a bigger issue here.
It's expecting that either of those things are going to happen.
Yes, this never says that they'll happen. It just says as oil fields are drained, as they're drained, then they drop. Okay, are you going to drain them? It's sort of like as you watch a show, you start to get sick. Oh, that means everybody's going to get sick. Well, no, if they don't watch shows, then they're not going to get sick. So this is assuming that that's going to happen. Does it have to assume that both of these things will happen?
Not necessarily.
No, only one of them has to happen. If you drain oil fields, then they'll go down. If you find new ones, then it'll go up. As long as one of those things happen, then your oil reserves are going to change.
Okay, but the thing is, it says because of that, therefore, oil reserves are likely to remain unchanged. So I thought like both of them have to happen. Like oil chains, in order for it to remain unchanged, then something has to drop and something has to
in order
rise.
for it to change, because they say unlikely to remain unchanged.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We discussed that already.
Yeah. Yeah. If you think that at least one of them has to happen, and you think that they have to remain the same, then you'd want both of them to happen to equal each other out. But they're just saying likely to change, and so as long as one of them happens, then you're likely to change.
Oh, it was the. They're annoying. Okay.
Yep. Unlikely to remain unchanged. Likely to change.
Got it.
Okay. So, answer choice A is wrong for what reason? This is a necessary assumption, which means we're asking ourselves, does this absolutely have to be assumed? What word kills it? Any nation with oil reserves. Is this conclusion about any nation with oil reserves? No, it's only about the ones who made these claims. Are we cool with that?
Yes.
So A is way too strong and it's out. B, it is likely that in 1997, in most of the nations that stated that their oil reserves were unchanged, we're talking about the right group here, right? Old oil fields were drained, or new ones were discovered, or both. We have to assume that that happened, at least one of those things happened, and if it did happen, then the conclusion starts to make a lot of sense, right? C, what makes C wrong?
Of at least one.
At least one is fine. We do have to assume that at least one of these nations saw some change. Because if none of them saw change,
Not only.
it's the not only but also. We don't have to assume that both of these things happened. Maybe in all of the nations only one thing happened, but it doesn't matter. As long as only one thing happened, their oil reserves changed. That's the same problem with D. Because D says at the very end, during 1997, that nation drained its old oil fields and discovered new ones. That's really helpful, but it's not necessary. We don't have to assume that both events occurred. We only have to assume that one event occurred, and that would cause their oil fields to change, or reserves.
I would have never got that.
See,
So
my thing is like, it's just like random things like minute wording and like, I don't know, like especially at the end. I mean, 16 is not the end, but I usually don't finish all the way, so it's like towards the end for me. Like, I don't know, like, I can't, not that I can't, but my vigilance, whatever word, like goes down when it comes to words. Like I'm not as like, because they get longer too, so then like random
That's exactly
mistakes
what they're
happen.
trying to test. Because like attention to detail is a big deal to
Yeah.
attorneys, right? You have some big long contract, and you know you get into an agreement, someone gets sued, and you're like, I just didn't really have the vigilance to look at that clause. I'm really sorry. It's gonna cost you $2 million, but you know, come on, you got get somebody else to do it. So that's
Like an intern?
yeah. Someone else
yeah.
has more energy, right? Like that's what they're testing. So in some ways you got to double down. So when you feel yourself doing that, it's better just to regroup and reread, because like if you can go at it with like a new energy, maybe that'll get you through it. Or a lot of times too, when you read through something and it's a little cloudy the first time, and when you read through it a second time, like it starts to make sense because you already have some context, right?
Yeah.
And that's all you need. And then you're like, oh, okay, now I know what you're saying. Don't try to pull that on me.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, cool.